Olá, daqui Rafaela Cortês. Em 1979, 3 palestinianos fundaram aquela a que chamaram a primeira Organização Palestiniana de Direitos Humanos. Deram-lhe, então, o nome de Direito ao Serviço do Homem. Um ano depois, em 1980, publicaram um primeiro livro documentando o Estado de Direito na Cisjordânia, onde faziam uso das posições e pareceres jurídicos das Nações Unidas para descrever como o território, incluindo Jerusalém Oriental, estava ocupado por Israel, mesmo que o Estado sionista o recusasse. A este sucederam-se dezenas de outras investigações, documentando as violações de direitos individuais e coletivos dos palestinianos, fazendo a defesa dos mecanismos legais nacionais e internacionais que os deveriam proteger e tentando responsabilizar os seus opressores. A organização seria mais tarde rebatizada como o Centro Aplicado de Lei Internacional Al-Haq. Al-Haq é hoje uma das maiores e mais reconhecidas organizações palestinianas. E, pelo seu trabalho de defesa dos direitos humanos e direito humanitário em Gaza e na Cisjordânia, é consecutivamente perseguida. Em 2018, o governo israelita publicou um relatório pedindo à União Europeia que cortasse o financiamento à Al-Haq, entre outras organizações não-governamentais palestinianas. Em 2019, apontou, sem provas, que a ONG tinha terroristas nas suas lideranças. Em 2022, declarou uma organização terrorista e o exército invadiu os seus escritórios. Contamos essa história em pormenor no segundo episódio da série Indústria da Ajuda na Palestina. Se ainda não ouviste, vai lá e depois volta aqui. Tudo fará mais sentido. Foi por essa altura, em 2022, que eu e o Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro fizemos esta entrevista ao Wesam Ahmad, diretor da Al-Haq. Wesam detalha as estratégias usadas por Israel para condicionar o trabalho de organizações palestinianas de direitos humanos, a criminalização, os ataques físicos e digitais, incluindo com o software de espionagem Pegasus, e as várias tentativas de afastar financiadores e ativistas internacionais. Wesam Ahmad aponta também para o impacto de outras formas de condicionamento mais estruturais, endémicas, não específicas do contexto palestiniano, como o financiamento projeto a projeto e as leis antiterrorismo. Hás-nos ouvir falar também da USAID, a Agência dos Estados Unidos para o Desenvolvimento Internacional, e da sua importância para o financiamento, não da Al-Haq, mas de uma série de outras organizações e projetos na Palestina. Esta entrevista aconteceu antes da administração de Donald Trump a ter desmantelado em julho de 2025. E já agora, a mais recente tentativa de condicionamento do trabalho da Al-Haq. Em setembro de 2025, o governo dos Estados Unidos pôs esta e 2 outras organizações palestinianas na lista de sanções. O motivo? Estarem diretamente envolvidas nos esforços do Tribunal Penal Internacional para investigar, prender, deter ou processar cidadãos israelitas ativos no genocídio em Gaza sem o consentimento de Israel. Em outubro, as consequências deste condicionamento escalaram. Estamos sem dinheiro, sem doações, sem nada, disse-nos Shawan Jabarin, diretor da Al-Haq. A equipa de 45 trabalhadores está sem salário e o trabalho depende, por agora, de voluntários. Wesam Ahmad, que vais ouvir, demitiu-se. Como falamos, esta tentativa de criminalização não é de agora. Fica, então, com a entrevista a Wesam Ahmad.
The issue of colonialism is really a key focus of our work in trying to unpack the reason international law has failed Palestine and looking at the barriers to the enforcement of international law. You see international law from a more critical standpoint naturally because it hasn't worked in the Palestinian context, and understanding the imperial origins and colonial origins of international law and seeing the modern day manifestation of colonialism within the Palestinian context. I refer to it as the best business practices of colonialism, where Israel has taken the lessons of the past and applied them to the present, drawing on all the various colonial enterprises of the past. And I think connecting our present to that colonial past is essential in our unpacking and understanding the barriers and also the things that allow this colonialism to continue. And I think it's a main reason why we are being targeted as a prominent civil society organization. We've been around since 1979. Our establishment was very much connected to the development of human rights and institutionalization of the human rights regime, and the idea that these laws that have been created of international human rights law are the tools that we should use to pursue our grievances, our right to self-determination. And so after 40 years of using these tools and not achieving the result that we want, it's naturally a responsibility on our part to figure out where the problems lie.
And where does it lie?
Exactly. And a lot of it is because international law is not detached from the social construct in which it's created at the international level. And so the international community is that society where international law is created, and it's very much connected to the power dynamics that create it as well. And so that's why we feel the law is an important tool, but it is only a tool that we need to push forward in order to have it have an impact here. We need to show the connection between the law and the society in which it develops, and recognize and identify where those challenges are. And I think one of the biggest challenges is to have a realization at the international level that the Palestinian issue is not something that is an isolated issue. Palestinian injustices are a microcosm of global injustices. The issues of neoliberal imperialism, exploitative capitalism, the role of transnational corporations, all of them are having an impact here in the Palestinian context, but having impacts in other parts of the world as well, and part of the broader challenge to the decolonization process of the past. So it's very much interconnected.
And do you think the international, let's say, the so-called international community, does it even see the question of Palestine as a colonial question?
Well, the international community has a problem seeing colonialism as a continuing issue in and of itself. In fact, only recently has colonialism and the legacies of colonialism been put back on the agenda of the UN. And I think the issue of colonialism is one of those things that we've seen of late, especially with recent movements like Black Lives Matter, unpacking that history of the colonial past and how it connects to the ongoing injustices of the present. But it is an uphill battle because there is a resistance to recognize the connection to the injustices of today to the actions of the past. Mm-hmm. And especially in Europe, where they are saying that was our previous generations that did this, not us. But a willingness to recognize the benefits that continue to be reaped and also the impact of that past on the present, especially in those former colonial territories, and the continuing relationship in different forms is a challenge that we need to confront to realize the truth in a more holistic sense. That isn't simply compartmentalized in the injustice of the present, but seeing its connection to the past.
Do you think, as they say, that it's a matter of being neutral or unbiased?
No, absolutely not. I mean, there is no neutrality in the international community. The states act on behalf of their interests, and that's the nature. The question is, what does pursuing individual self-interest lead to? And it's a history of humanity and the attempt to strike a balance between self-interest and self-restraint. And what is it that we impose on ourselves to restrain ourselves from doing things that we otherwise could do? And taking it to a more macro level, to the state level and the level of the international community, this takes us to what the international system is supposed to serve as. Is it an interest-based system or is it a value-based system? And so if we want to take what is written on paper about international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it has to be applied universally. If it's applied selectively and used as a tool for furthering imperial interests, then it undermines that value-based that we see as the real reason we need to have this international system. Otherwise, it simply becomes a rule-based system that is designed to achieve interests rather than ensure rights.
And is it possible to change it?
Well, the system is created by human beings, and it is human beings that are impacted by it, and they are very much connected. And so
But
we
there
have
are
to have
power
faith.
relations,
Of course,
right?
of course.
So
The
I mean,
power relations are not static. They are dynamic and they change. And the engagement with the system is a ongoing process. And so injustice of the past, injustice of the present does not mean that injustice has to continue, but it isn't going to change on its own. It requires our engagement within the system, our interaction with it, and changing it from within, because we are a part of it. And we have to recognize our connection to it rather than look at it as something separate from us. And one of the big obstacles that we face in our work at Al-Haq using international law is the lack of political will for states to act based on what international law says their obligations are. And for a long time, I think the issue of political will was seen as this kind of amorphous, abstract obstacle that we simply stop there and say there's a lack of political will. But over the last decades, I feel like we have taken the philosophy that that obstacle becomes the path. And so we have delved into what it is that makes political will. That reflection of a society's action is very much connected to the system in which that society exists. And any social system has both political, economic, and cultural components. And so we need to engage on all these levels in order to have a shift in the political will, not simply wait for it to change on its own. And so it is a challenge on our part to delve in and peel back and deconstruct those various components, understand how they're connected to one another, and work on those areas where we can. And one prime example of that is the issue of business and human rights, the economic incentive structures that perpetuate the ongoing colonization of Palestine. And when you challenge those economic interests, you see the relationships, and it also helps to identify the disconnect between the political rhetoric and economic activity. And I feel like by following those economic dimensions and the issue of business and human rights and trying to hold corporations accountable, this has elevated the potential cost of Israel's engagement of its policies in the continued colonization of Palestine, which has led it to react in a more forceful manner. Because if we are doing work that doesn't make it uncomfortable, then it doesn't mind. It will allow us to continue so long as there is no impact. But as our work starts having an impact, when we are actually pursuing accountability in things like the International Criminal Court, when we are exposing the financial relations and interests, when we are countering the narrative that Israel puts forward as being a democratic state by exposing the dimensions of apartheid and inequality, all these things run counter to Israel's policies and the interests it is trying to pursue, and its view at the international community and how the international community sees it. And so, as we challenge that, it leads to a natural reaction by Israel to try to silence us. And it is the pursuit of truth and the source of oppression and unpacking it that makes the oppressor uncomfortable. And this is also not disconnected from the recent killing of the journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. As a journalist in the pursuit of truth and shining a light on what is happening, Israel doesn't want that. And so that killing is also connected to Israel's policies of allowing people from abroad to come and visit. When you hear about apartheid abroad, and if you are a human being that has intellectual curiosity and wants to foment your own opinion rather than have it given to you, one of the things you would naturally want to do is come to see the situation and make a judgment for yourself. And so by Israel imposing additional barriers on people being able to come and see the situation with their own eyes and experience it is part of this creating this another brick in the wall of apartheid and preventing people from coming to see the situation. And so that makes it harder for people to come up with their own opinion. They're left to read what is available to them rather than come and experience the situation firsthand. And experience isn't simply about sight and seeing. It is about a more holistic experience. You smell the occupation, you feel the occupation, and all these senses play an important part in how you develop your view. And by Israel preventing people from having that more immersive experience and ability to be able to make a judgment is part of the way that it wants to keep people in the dark. And our work in pursuing the truth and Shireen's work was about shining a light in the darkness. And it is very much a constant battle that we're facing.
Yeah, and do you feel that the same level of politicization can be seen in the international NGOs?
Well, look, NGOs in general, there's a recent piece that I came across called the NGOization of human rights and how it's become this kind of profession rather than social justice cause. And there's no doubt, I mean, I've been doing this work for now almost 20 years. And it's natural also to see the criticism within that system. And it is incumbent upon us to recognize, not falling into the trap of becoming simply an institution for the purpose of reinforcing the existing system. When we recognize that there are challenges that need to be addressed on the system as a whole, we need to be aware of that, and we need to raise that and not get trapped in the business of human rights. There is the term I like to use, being trapped in a hamster wheel, where the system creates these kind of hamster wheels for you to dissipate your energy towards what you're trying to achieve and give you a sense that you are doing something, but in reality, you are just running in place.
And is this what you see in the business of human rights?
I see it as a legitimate criticism of the system, and it is, in order to challenge that, the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that it exists as a problem, and a lot of people don't want to do that. But I think once we do recognize that, and we recognize that what we are doing here isn't simply a job, it is a pursuit of a cause, then we naturally have to find ways to challenge those dynamics that prevent us from realizing the goals that we are trying to achieve within the confines of the system to the extent possible, because the alternatives are not as clear, so to say. But we have to recognize where the challenges are, the obstacles are, and work towards them as well, rather than simply go around them.
But what are those challenges? Like, can you...
Well, I mean, the political power dynamics of the international community stem from the origins of the United Nations and the creation of the Security Council based on the victors of World War II, and how those power dynamics continue to persist in the international law's evolution, and the realization of the rights for people that aren't on that pedestal of power dynamics.
But I meant, what are the, like you were talking about, like acknowledging the problems, the obstacles, the challenges that the NGO system also has in itself. what are those challenges? What do you see?
Some of them are the issue of funding, for example, and how funding has gone from core funding to project funding, and project funding to more specific kind of projects that are trying to instill within organizations working on particular issues rather than address root causes. And anytime you start narrowing a goal into log frames and lines and boxes, the more difficult it becomes to see the bigger picture. And I think it is kind of trying to get us lost in the forest for the trees, where we end up focusing on implementing a specific activity, forgetting the importance of its connection to the bigger goal. And this is part of the challenges we have even within our own work, relying on international support and projects and program support from different partners. Part of our engagement with them is the letting them see how they could potentially be harmful in their engagement in this kind of log frame approach, and why it's important for them to support on a more macro level. And we understand their own internal dynamics and challenges, especially when they are operating at an international level and they have global policies. But our challenge is to also show them the specific nature of our situation in this modern day colonialism and the conflict between quotes, in that it isn't a conflict between two equal parties, and how the power dynamics play a role in what we are able to do and also influences what their policies might be towards us.
But what is the rationale for that shift from core funding to project funding, for example? Because, I mean, I understand why you think that this is could be harmful for Al-Haq and for the whole system, but what is on the other side, what they probably explain why they do that. Like, what is the rationale on their side?
I think they have different justifications. From one standpoint, I think the more you can narrow down, the easier it is to follow and ensure that things are done. And so from a standpoint of sort of accountability and the realization of the specific activity being implemented, it's easier to do so and easier to report on. And unfortunately, human nature is to follow the path of least resistance. And so if we are talking about the big goal of the realization of the right to self-determination for the Palestinian people, and that goal not being something that can be measured in 1, 2 year, 3 year projects, it becomes easier for them to say, we'll leave that issue aside and want you to do X, Y, Z specific activities. And then we have to be careful not to lose sight how these activities are connected to the bigger goal, and not get trapped in the goal being to implement the activities.
So do you feel that lately the clerical part of the work, the reporting, has increased?
Yeah, absolutely. The more you have projects, the more narrow the dimensions of the work are, the more bureaucratic it becomes. It increases the transactional costs of doing the work, and that adds to the administrative load. And the more admin energy you put in a system of an institution that has limited energy and resources, that forces you to divert energy towards bureaucracy rather than the core work that you're trying to achieve.
So you're raising money to hire people to raise money.
It becomes a cyclical problem. Yes, absolutely.
And what is the result of all of that today in the struggle for Palestinian freedom? Like the result of the shift of that we've been talking about in terms of funding?
I think it has made human rights work much more part of a system of bureaucracy and making it more narrow in focus in terms of achieving specific activity-based outcomes rather than focusing on results-based work, which is much more long-term. And I think this is also part of the challenge of neoliberalism, and recognizing neoliberalism as having this juridical project component that seeks to isolate the different elements within society and separate the political and the economic and the cultural as if they are separated, and put the human rights organizations in a box, separating them from the economic dimensions and the political dimensions. And I think we recognize that, no, they're very much interconnected, and it is our challenge to show those connections and address the source of our injustice on a more holistic manner. But the project and funding and conditions run counter to addressing things in a holistic manner.
What kind of conditions?
Well, I mean, conditions, the one that is probably the biggest one on the Palestinian society's radar is the issue of the terrorism, anti-terrorism clauses. And this, we have seen firsthand how the issue of counterterrorism is abused. And the UN Special Rapporteur on counterterrorism and human rights has directly addressed this in a recent report as well, of how Israel is exploiting the issue of anti-terrorism. But we see when funders put these clauses in their contracts, these clauses and the use of the term terrorism in and of itself is a loaded term that has political connotations, and it is the powers that decide who is labeled as a terrorist, and that inherently is connected to the power dynamics that exist. And so...
Well, the freedom fighters for South Africa were terrorists, right?
Of course. And if you look back throughout colonial history, in colonial history, were the colonized people seen as just in their struggles. I mean, that's why it's not new to Palestine. What we see within the Palestinian context is simply this refinement of colonialism through new means and methods, and one being the use of spyware, for example. The use of Pegasus spyware against Al-Haq staff and others was actually discovered before the designation. But again, we don't see the issue of the use of spyware on Palestinian civil society in isolation. It is very much connected to this broader system of surveillance and how the use of and the development of such technology within the Palestinian context at the expense of the Palestinian population and exploiting a captive population to do that creates an economic dimension and benefit for Israel to develop such technology and export it abroad.
Yeah, but can you be a little bit more specific on the condition? So, for example, the anti-terrorism clause. What does it actually say? Like, what is the language?
Well, different funders have different components that they put in, and different phrasing and how it's portrayed. And obviously, in our opinion, the violations of international law that they claim to seek to address, in our opinion, are addressed in existing international law, international humanitarian law, and the prohibition on the targeting of civilians, even in conflict situations, indiscriminate attacks, proportionality. All these things exist. But by adding this layer of who we've decided to label, it just creates this additional political dimension, and to almost a certain extent, trying to force us to have adopt their own positions. Yeah, it's about connecting the list that particular states might have recognized. So you have different lists as well. You have the UN list, you have the US list, you have the EU list, and they're not all the same. And so each one has its own views about who it wants to put on and who it doesn't want to put on. And that is very much part of the problem of using the issue of terrorism, because we see how it's abused and taken advantage of. And that's why we adhere to the use of international law, and the prohibitions in international law we feel are sufficient to address their concerns, unless there is a desire to use it for political purposes on their end. And that's where the suspicion arises, where if you agree to what they say with regard to a list, then anything else that is added to that later, you're not going to be able to challenge as well, and it can create a trap.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing about this decision from the EU to recently, like in the past 2 years, to kind of stress this clause that has to deal with the thing you're talking about. They claim that it's been there forever, but now they're stressing that it's a concern. Has that affected, have you seen it affecting Al-Haq and other organizations from the civil society like Al-Haq?
Yeah, it's had an impact. I mean, it's been a very big concern of how it could potentially be exploited. And when you look at the history of the Palestinian people and their struggle, and how many Palestinians have gone through the Israeli prison system, you capture so many of the Palestinian population, and then try to separate and isolate the Palestinian organizations from the society in which they are functioning, and putting them in a situation where they are trying to defend their support from a particular funder, and how that can also have a negative impact within society of how we are viewed as being somehow implementing a foreign agenda. And so it creates a sense of distrust as well. But I mean, I think we've been lucky because we have a strong base of support, and our supporters are long-term supporters, and they are aware of these political dynamics and how they are being potentially exploited. And one of the things that we are also raising is the importance of recognizing, in a conflict situation, when you have differing views of who's in the right with regard to the context, you're naturally going to have this use of terminology as a tool of oppression as well. And so by allowing the more powerful party, being Israel in this context, to dictate to third states who they can and cannot engage with, is actually an interference in their own foreign policy in a conflict situation, where they, as third states, not party to the conflict, have their own unique obligations and should be able to make their own determinations as to who they engage with and why.
Mm-hmm. But can you explain that process? What happened regarding the EU funding and that clause?
Well, again, the process has been met with resistance from Palestinian civil society as a whole, and it is something that we get the response that this is a global policy and we have to keep it in, and we don't use this to for political ends, and we are not using this as a trap, but we recognize how Israel might also be able to use it, and that's one of the main concerns. And so
because that's what the EU representative said, right? That this was just a global policy, and this was actually already like a rule somehow inside EU funding.
I mean, this is what all funders, when they have these clauses in there, they say this is not specific to you. But we tell them, you need to deal with us in a unique situation because of these power dynamics, because of the societal dynamics. And the challenge for them is to create a unique tool in engaging with us in our particular context or in conflict situations in general. And this requires more political will on their part. But again, They are more inclined to try to adopt a blanket approach rather than deal with the nuances of the specifics within the particular context. And this is an ongoing
and what is Al-Haq's decision or response to that? Like, does that mean that Al-Haq is, for the time being, or for whenever that clause is in contracts, not going to engage with those partners?
We've rejected these clauses.
Which means rejecting the funding.
Exactly.
And what's the impact in Al-Haq? Because it's one of the biggest funders, right?
No, actually, the EU is not the biggest funders. We have individual funders, states individually. The EU, we had more a project that was ongoing, and they actually suspended it based on allegations coming from third parties, and that is an issue that we are challenging. But at the same time, we are not looking to have any new EU funding with these clauses in place. And so it's part of the ongoing challenge.
Are there other funding or funders that you also rejected because of clauses and conditioners?
Well, we have some that we reject outright as a matter of principle from the beginning, like US aid, for example. These clauses are very much connected to September 11th and the U.S. Interests in putting these clauses forward, and we've seen them trickle down in other partnerships as well. And it's something that we are constantly aware of and watching to see how they the ripple effect that these clauses might have. When we sense that these clauses are coming with political motivations and seeking to apply political pressure, we reject them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back to something you said earlier, there's been a lot of investment in the development of Palestine, and like in the billions of dollars. Where has this money gone to, like a neoliberal project? Like, where does the money go to? What kind of sectors does this money go to?
I don't want to go into specifics and specific projects, but in a general sense, the issue of development in the context of occupation is problematic in and of itself. Is the development seeking to reinforce the existing status quo and develop therein, or is it seeking to decouple from the power dynamics and reduce the dependency that Israel is trying to instill on the Palestinian population? And this is where we have to be wary about how projects are portrayed, how they are put forward, what they are trying to actually develop. Is it developing in a way that contributes to the realization of right to self-determination, or is it contributing to the sustainability of the existing power dynamics and dependency and exploitation that Israel maintains against the Palestinian people?
And what's the answer?
Well, it's our challenge to keep pushing that, and I have no doubt that there are projects that support this dependency, and there are projects that counter that dependency, and our goal is to work on those projects that counter that dependency.
Another topic that we've been hearing, speaking to multiple people on the conditional funding, is also not only the anti-terrorism clauses, but also the conditions for example, changing textbooks and changing the way the history of Palestine is told in schools, not calling Israel apartheid or other different names. Do you also see that in your work?
We see it in our work. We see it around the world. I mean, in the U.S., there's discussion about schools receiving funding if they teach critical race theory. And so, again, this is part of the challenge in the pursuit of truth, in understanding things in a more holistic manner, understanding the sources of the reality that you are living in and the injustices that you are trying to challenge. And I think just like in the US, there are political dimensions at play and ideological dimensions that are trying to force a particular view and a particular way of thinking. And this is part of our struggle to counter that and not have imposed upon us one particular viewpoint, but pursue the truth in a more holistic sense.
And can you explain the targeting of Al-Haq? I mean, you started by saying that the targeting of the organization has been increasing. Can you explain what you mean and how does that show itself?
It's connected to the work that we've been doing, as I said, on issues of business and human rights and international accountability. All these things have created the discomfort on the Israeli side in the fulfillment of their policies, and their natural reaction is to push back against us. But they are doing so in an indirect manner, trying to scare away the international support rather than come and raid our offices, for example. But we feel the international reaction to these designations has been very good in not letting Israel get away with it. Even those allies of Israel that have seen the so-called secret evidence that they portray have not taken the bait and reject the designations. But
you mean the designations as terrorist organizations,
right?
Which is what Israel says Al-Haq is, but you don't know why.
Yeah.
No, but I mean you don't know the secret evidence.
Oh no, they won't share the secret evidence.
Not even with Al-Haq.
I mean, we have lodged these complaints through even the Israeli judicial system. In order for us to be able to counter these allegations, we need to see what the allegations are that you're basing this on. But the problem is the judicial system is part and parcel of the system that continues to develop this policy of colonialism. And so we have no misgivings of expectation that the judicial system will work in our favor. But we are also trying to expose it as being part of the problem.
But it sounds weird, right? That a state adds an organization to a terrorist list, but then doesn't tell them and doesn't show the evidence that allow them to reach that conclusion.
Well, I mean, the issue of secret evidence also is not unique to the Palestinian context. It's used in other contexts as well, and they have their excuses of being for reasons of national security and things like that. But the fact that strong allies of Israel have seen documents and saying this is not justified undermines the strength of their argument. But it can't completely overcome it because Israel is able to operate as it wants. And so long as there's no pushback where Israel bears a cost for these actions, there's no incentive for it to change.
And it creates a distraction, right? Because instead of focusing on the work now, there's a lot of resources being put into this accusation.
Yes, being here today on a Friday to have this discussion is part of the distraction. And I would say also it has exposed the arrogance that Israel has in thinking that it can use such tactics to undermine our ability to function. Because we don't simply do this as a job, it has actually strengthened us. And we find more energy to counter this and do our work as well. And it has brought civil society closer together. And there's a recognition that Israel might have started with these 6 organizations, but there are other organizations that could come to follow as well. And this seeking to isolate the strongest dimensions of civil society is part of their broader strategy of continuing their process of colonization.
Mm-hmm.
Did that change your life personally?
For me, no. I see it as a badge of honor that the work we are doing is worth doing. That Israel has paid attention to us and reacted to us in this way. But each individual has their own risk tolerance and views of how they see themselves and their future, and I can't generalize the reaction of everyone.
But does that mean today that you are a terrorist for Israel?
In Israel's eyes? You would think so, but the fact that I'm coming to work, the fact that I was actually traveling 2 weeks ago, and when I travel, I go through Israeli controls without any incident.
So you can still fly? And
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and this is, it reinforces the position that what Israel is really trying to do is scare away the international community, and even officials recognize that as they themselves being the target of these designations rather than us directly, and this use of behavioral psychology, fight or flight, and Israel is betting on flight, that the international community will simply run away and avoid the headache. We are betting on fight, that they recognize that this tactic is being used in an unjust manner, and they need to double down in their support for us to counter it.
We've been also hearing from a lot of people who either work or worked at NGOs that it's very, very striking, the salaries disparities between local employees and the so-called expats. Is that something that also happens at Al-Haq?
No, Al-Haq is a Palestinian organization, and I think that's part of what has kept its credibility is that it is part and parcel of society. It isn't like international organizations that pay people international staff something that is much different. But it is a problem for sure on a global scale, not just in Palestine. And there is also this general criticism how these institutions, especially international institutions, can become part of the problem as part of the process of neo-colonialism.
But you agree that that is a problem, and that is true in international NGOs particularly?
I agree, and I think it's been addressed in various forms as well. A book I recommend you read is Empire, Harta Negri, which also specifically looks at this issue, but it's been addressed in various scholarship as well.
Mm-hmm. And why? What is the reason why, for example, when you look at the top positions of and leadership positions, particularly for international NGOs in Palestine, and I know that it's also a global problem, but when you look at Palestinian, international NGOs that are working in Palestine, it's very, very difficult to find Palestinians in those leadership positions. Why is that?
Well, I think it has to do with the policies of the international organizations themselves, and I mean, from their perspective, they are implementing the mandates of these international organizations and need representatives of where these organizations are headquartered to implement that mandate. But it is, I think, part of a constant struggle as well to ensure that Palestinians maintain the agency of the work rather than have it imposed upon them by international
But even,
agendas.
for example, UNRWA, which you can, I think, argue that is a Palestinian agency, even though part of UN also doesn't have people in most of the leadership positions are also from white Westerners instead of Palestinians, right?
Yes, and I think, there are certain justifications that they use for that. Part of it is to avoid bias, that having Palestinians working in Palestine and...
For a Palestinian agency.
Exactly. But it's an international agency that is implementing, and it isn't Palestinian resources that are being used to develop. It is reliant on international resources as well. And so those financing constraints and conditions that exist, we've seen that play out whether in Palestine or elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. And is it even possible to change that? I mean, or is it possible to reform it?
Well, there's always a possibility, and that's part
You're
of.
You're very optimistic.
Well, we have to maintain our optimism. If we simply capitulate to the way things are, that they can't be changed, we might as well pack up and go home. We have to maintain the hope that there is a better future possible, but we recognize it's an uphill battle. It's not going to be easy. And so wherever those challenges lie, we try to address them to the extent that we can. Again, we have to utilize our resources in the most efficient and effective way possible, and we can't address everything. And that's why I think part of the importance of connecting with people like yourselves is to highlight how interconnected these challenges are. And so it isn't simply us acting alone. It is you acting in Portugal and reaching your audience in other parts of the world and showing that the injustice that the Palestinian people are facing is connected to broader injustice. And even if you're not addressing Palestine wherever you are in the world, if you're addressing injustice, you will be contributing to the reduction of injustice towards the Palestinians as well.
And how do you see the role of UNRWA connected to the right of return?
I think UNRWA, I don't know too much about the intricacies of the agency, but I do feel anytime an agency is created that seeks to isolate a problem, as if Palestinian refugees are somehow separate from the refugees that are in other parts of the world, and deal with them in isolation, allows for a certain amount of control of the issue. And I think that makes it more challenging to address the underlying problems and how trying to exceptionalize Palestine, as if it's not the universal problems of refugees that need to be addressed, and their right to return needs to be dealt with in a different way than the right of return of, say, Ukrainian refugees. And these double standards of dealing with them highlight the political dimensions of international law and its ability to work without political will and the political interests at play that prevent that political will from shifting.
But wouldn't not having the UNRWA harm the struggle for the right of return?
No. I mean, UNRWA is an agency that helps Palestinian refugees. And there is no doubt that it provides important support. But it is also, it shouldn't be disconnected from the rights of refugees on a global basis, and the support of refugees. The idea that those in the international community that want to support refugees can do so through one agency to the exclusion of Palestine is a problem. And we need to have the Palestinian right of return and the issue of refugees anywhere in the world that need to be addressed on a holistic level, rather than try to piecemeal them for political purposes.
Should it be dismantled then?
The UNRWA is part of the UN system, okay? The UN system as a whole needs reform. And so in that sense, the entire system and all the agencies that work within it, if they are not contributing to the realization of the purpose in which they were created, it reinforces the argument that the reform needs to take place on a broader scale. How that reform will look like is very much connected to the issue of one-state or two-state solution position. If people are free to decide, if the system allows for the realization of the right to self-determination and the realization of the rights of the people, then the people will decide how that system should function, whether it's a reform within the agency, the creation of a new agency. But this is where the clash between the power dynamics that create the system in and of itself and those that are not benefiting from that system, and how in order for them to benefit, the system itself needs to be reformed.
But do you think that sectors such as health and education should be handed over to the Palestinians?
Well, to which Palestinians? Because we have our own issues with regard to the lack of legitimate democratic representation as well. And so that's why we have to be careful about trying to deal with things in a piecemeal manner where we go from one problem to another. And that's why we have to see things in a more holistic manner. And so having elections on the Palestinian level from not just from municipal level, but top down is part of that more holistic process to ensure Palestinian representation in engaging with entities like the UN and pushing forward the goals that represent the Palestinian will.
But do they want elections? Like, do the funders, do the international community organizations want elections in Palestine?
Well, democracy is one of the things that they're selling, and so the rhetoric is yes. Behind the scenes, I can't say.
But they were postponed indefinitely, right? The elections.
I mean, we've had municipal elections.
Yeah. But the presidency.
Yeah,
and
the presidency,
yeah.
Palestinian Legislative Council, the Palestinian National Council, all these things, if they are going to maintain any sense of legitimacy, it has to be a reflection of the will of the people. And the argument that we can't do this, I think, is very much connected to political dynamics and interests. And I think, yes, the occupation is the biggest obstacle to the realization of our right to self-determination, but that shouldn't excuse our ability to pursue that self-determination to the extent that we can. Otherwise, I think we undermine the broader pursuit of the right to self-determination.
Acabaste de ouvir uma entrevista com Wesam Ahmad, diretor do Centro de Direito Internacional Aplicado, Al-Haq, gravada em 2022 durante a produção da Indústria da Ajuda na Palestina. Podes ouvir essa série de 4 episódios em qualquer aplicação de podcasts. Esta entrevista foi feita por mim, Rafaela Cortês, e pelo Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro. A Margarida David Cardoso cortou-a e escreveu isto que te estou a ler. O Bernardo Afonso editou o som, Joana Teresa Batista fez identidade gráfica, o Lucas Grimaldo Freitas, a estratégia de comunicação, o Fred Rocha tratou do website. Consulta em fumaca.pt a série completa, várias outras entrevistas, visualizações de dados e uma enorme lista de livros, filmes e podcasts que nos foram úteis nesta investigação. Fazem ainda parte da equipa Fumaça António Assunção, Luís Marquês, Maria Almeida e Nuno Viegas. Até já!